Welcome to this journey into the past, where the impossible becomes reality. Over the next 2 hours, we will explore 20 ancient mysteries that defy history, logic, and everything you thought you knew. Get ready, because what you are about to hear has no explanation. The lost civilization of Atlantis. The story of Atlantis begins in the writings of the Greek philosopher Plato. More than 2,000 years ago, he included his account in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. It was no minor mention. He spoke of an ancient and powerful civilization that had existed long before any other, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, on an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. A rich, wise culture with advanced technology, enormous temples, navigable canals, lush gardens, and an army capable of challenging even the Greeks. But above all, Plato recounted that this civilization had disappeared suddenly, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, many assumed that it was all a simple allegory, that Plato, as a good philosopher, had invented the story to illustrate moral ideas about decadence, arrogance, and divine punishment. However, as time passed, what seemed like a myth began to raise deeper questions. What if it wasn't just a moral warning? What if behind those words there was a real basis, a distorted memory of a world that really existed? Since the Renaissance, and especially since the 19th century, numerous explorers, archaeologists, writers, and scientists have searched for Atlantis in every corner of the world. Theories have pointed to different places, from the island of Santorini, where the eruption of the volcano of Thera could have wiped an entire culture from history, to the depths of the Caribbean, where some underwater structures in Cuba and the Bahamas have fueled the popular imagination. Some have even suggested that Atlantis was nothing more than Antarctica before being buried under ice, when its climate was temperate and could have supported human life. One of the most fascinating aspects of Atlantis is the image of a civilization ahead of its time. Plato described stone buildings decorated with shiny metals such as orichalcum, perfectly organized canals connecting different parts of the city, advanced agriculture, and a well-structured social organization. The Atlanteans ruled the sea, traded, explored other lands, and lived in abundance that seemed almost magical. And yet, all of that was lost abruptly, as if it had never existed. The story also tells of punishment. The gods, according to Plato, punished Atlantis for its arrogance and desire to conquer the world. This part of the story has been interpreted by some as a symbol, but also as a pattern that repeats itself throughout history. Civilizations that reach the peak of their power only to fall because of their own mistakes or catastrophic events beyond there. Control. One of the most discussed theories links Atlantis to the Minoan civilization, which flourished on the island of Crete more than 3,000 years ago. The Minoans had an advanced maritime culture, monumental architecture, and a sophisticated lifestyle for their time. But a natural disaster, possibly the eruption of the volcano on Thera, marked the beginning of their decline. The similarities between the fall of the Minoans and Plato's account are striking. However, some argue that the scale of Atlantis, described by Plato, goes far beyond what the Minoan culture was, and at the time he mentions 9,000 years before Solon, is much older than the age of Crete. Traces of Atlantis have also been sought in America. Some see echoes of that lost civilization in the pre-Columbian cultures of the continent. The Mayan cities in the middle of the jungle with their astronomical observatories, pyramids, and mathematical knowledge seem to appear out of nowhere. The Aztecs spoke of a place of origin called Aslan, a mysterious island from which they set out to found their civilization. The coincidences, although superficial, have fueled the idea that the ancient peoples of America could have been connected in some way to a more remote and unknown common past. Technology has also played a curious role in this enigma. Since the popularization of seabed scanning, strange structures have been detected submerged at various points around the globe. Some appear natural, others show alignments or shapes that are too regular not to arouse suspicion. In the 1990s, a supposed submerged city was discovered off the coast of Cuba with stone blocks and geometric formations. The researchers who participated in the discovery spoke of a city that sank more than 10,000 years ago, which would coincide with the date mentioned by Plato in his texts. However, the studies were not continued, and everything was shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. Beyond the geographical details, what keeps Atlantis alive in the collective imagination is its powerful symbolic significance. It represents the idea that there are deep gaps in our past, chapters we do not know, cultures that may have existed and left an invisible mark. It reminds us that the history we study is only a part of what was, and that there are fragments buried under layers of time, earth, and oblivion. There are those who believe that Atlantis was not a single place, but rather the name that has remained in memory for a global civilization that existed before the flood, as suggested by some Sumerian legends or the Popol Vuh. Other cultures speak of times before the Great Flood, of submerged cities of gold, of wise men who came from the sea after the fall of a previous world. These coincidences scattered across different continents have led some alternative researchers to postulate the existence of a mother culture that transmitted knowledge before disappearing. Of course, most of the scientific community considers these ideas to be part of pseudo-history. There is no conclusive evidence that Atlantis actually existed, but there is also no evidence to rule it out completely. And therein lies the power of mystery, in its resistance to being completely silenced. Atlantis has become an idea that transcends time, a kind of ancestral memory that we all share without knowing it. Some writers have suggested that Plato may have had access to older accounts, perhaps Egyptian, and simply passed on a story that predated him by a long time. Egyptian chronicles spoke of cataclysms, lost civilizations, and an ancient world left behind. Solon, the Greek sage who is said to have heard the story of Atlantis in Egypt, was known for his interest in collecting ancient knowledge. Perhaps the story was told many times before it reached Plato, distorted, adapted, embellished, but with a core of truth hidden beneath layers of myth. The possibility that Atlantis may have existed, even if only in the form of an advanced culture, erased by time, confronts us with a question that goes beyond archaeology. What do we really know about our most distant past? How many civilizations have been buried without a trace? Atlantis, more than a place, has become a symbol of what we do not know, of the history that still waits to be told. And as long as there is no definitive evidence to confirm or disprove its existence, it will remain one of the most powerful and evocative stories of the ancient world. A shining shadow on the horizon of our origins that seems to remind us that perhaps not everything is written in stone. Göbekli Tepe, high on a barren hill in southeastern Turkey, surrounded by a landscape of dry fields and rolling hills, stand a site that has challenged everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. Its name is Göbekli Tepe, and for a long time it was hidden under tons of earth, rocks, and centuries of oblivion. At first glance, it looked like just another insignificant mound among many, a place with no history. But what lay beneath would change the way we understand the human past. It was in the 1990s when a German archaeologist, Klaus Schmidt, decided to excavate what many considered a common grave or a minor settlement. What he found, however, was beyond any academic prediction. As the earth receded under the shovels and brushes, huge pillars of, perfectly erected in circles, adorned with reliefs of animals carved with uncanny precision. Foxes, snakes, wild boars, vultures, all sculpted with an artistic level that did not fit with the age of the structure. But the most puzzling thing was not the art or the size of the stones, but the date. Subsequent analysis confirmed that Göbekli Tepe was built around 10,000 BC. That means it was erected more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge and 7,000 years before the pyramids of Egypt. At that point in prehistory, humans were supposed to have lived in small nomadic tribes, hunting and gathering, with no established agriculture, no cities, no writing, and certainly no ability to organize such a complex architectural project. But there was, standing in the ground, a temple that forced us to rewrite what we thought we knew about the beginnings of organized society. The pillars of Göbekli, some of which reach 6 meters in height and weigh more than 20 tons, are arranged in concentric circles, as if it were a ceremonial space designed to bring many people together for a common purpose. The most curious thing is that no traces of dwellings, agricultural tools, or signs of daily life were found around it. This led archaeologists to believe that the temple predated the settlements, which breaks with the traditional idea that agriculture came first, then villages, and then, as a natural consequence of development, temples and religious structures. This discovery suggests, on the contrary, that religion, or at least the need to gather for collective rituals, may have been the driving force behind the creation of the first stable communities. People organized themselves to build something sacred, and, as a result, they stayed, cultivated the land, and developed new ways of life. Spirituality, rather than the need for food, may have been the foundation of civilization. Another disturbing detail about Göbekli Tepe is that after several phases of construction, it was intentionally buried, not by the passage of time or erosion, but deliberately covered by those who had built it. This act was not done carelessly or urgently, but with care, as if they wanted to protect it, hide it, or seal it forever. That decision adds another layer of mystery to the site. What happened? Why abandon a temple of such magnitude? Was it a change of beliefs? A crisis? A symbolic act? Some researchers have suggested that the animal reliefs and symbols could have astronomical significance. There are those who claim that the animals represent constellations and that the temple was a kind of star calendar, an observatory carved in stone to track the movement of the heavens. Along these lines, one theory proposes that Göbekli Tepe was built in response to a cosmic catastrophe, such as a comet impact or a major climatic event. The temple would then have been a place to remember or protect oneself from the heavens. But there are other interpretations. Some think that Göbekli Tepe was an initiation center, a space for rites of passage, perhaps even related to death or spiritual rebirth. The fact that many of the figures or predators could reflect a vision of a spiritual world full of intense, sometimes threatening forces. At that time, humans lived surrounded by wild animals, and fear, admiration, and the need to understand that environment would have been powerful drivers for creating such intense symbolism. The implications of Göbekli Tepe do not end with archaeology. What this place raises is a complete change of perspective. If more than 12,000 years ago, there were already people capable of conceiving and executing such a project, what other things could they have done that were not recorded? How many other structures buried by time or destroyed by the climate still await discovery? This site has opened a window into the distant past, into a dark period of human history that until now had only been imagined in vague outlines. The site was carefully designed. Each pillar seems to have been placed with a purpose, with orientations that are still being studied. There is no improvisation, suggesting not only physical strength or tools, but also planning, social organization, leaders, and shared knowledge, elements that until recently were believed to be absent in Paleolithic societies. As if that weren't enough, Göbekli Tepe is not unique. As research has expanded in the region, other similar sites have appeared, smaller or more eroded, but with the same signature. Theashapet pillars, circular arrangements, animal symbols. This indicates that Göbekli Tepe was part of a tradition, a much more extensive cultural network, a civilization without a name, without writing, without recognizable cities, but with a clear identity marked in stone. One of the most puzzling aspects is the level of technology required to carve and transport these blocks. Although archaeologists have suggested stone tools, there is still no clear explanation of how they move structures weighing so many tons without wheels or pack animals. Some speculate the use of ramps, wooden rollers, or organized brute force. Others delve into less accepted theories that speak of lost knowledge, ancient techniques, or even contact with earlier cultures that have since disappeared. Today, Göbekli Tepe remains under excavation. Only part of the site has been unearthed, and what remains hidden beneath the hill could be even more surprising. Every stone, every symbol, every layer of earth removed could change what we know. And in the meantime, the place continues to generate questions, fascination, and a certain vertigo, because deep down, what is most disconcerting is not what can be seen, but what it suggests. That there was a time long ago when human beings already dreamed big, already thought about the afterlife, already built with a vision that seemed ahead of its time. Gobklipe is not just a temple. It is a whisper from the distant past, a voice that has remained silent for millennia and is now beginning to speak. Its history is not written in books or chronicles, but in stone carved by ancient hands. And every line, every shape, every structure tells us that perhaps the origin of civilization is not where we had placed it, that the beginning was much earlier and much more complex. The lost city of Za, in the unfathomable heart of the Amazon jungle, where trees rise like living cathedrals and rivers meander with the patience of centuries, lies a story that has fascinated explorers, archaeologists, and dreamers alike. It is the story of an obsession, of a civilization never confirmed, and of a man who ventured into the unknown, convinced that he would find a forgotten metropolis that would rewrite the history of the continent. He called it the Lost City of Zeta, and his search marked the end or the beginning of one of the most enigmatic legends of modern times. It all begins with Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett, a British cartographer born in the mid-19th century, seasoned by military discipline and forged on the fringes of the known world. Fawcett was no ordinary adventurer. His reputation in geographical circles was impeccable. His maps of the Amazon, drawn with almost obsessive meticulousness, had helped to draw borders between warring countries. But beyond his technical precision, there was a constant restlessness, a spirit that seemed to seek something deeper than lines on paper. During his expeditions through Brazil and Bolivia, Fawcett began to hear legends passed down through generations of indigenous peoples. Stories of lost cities, of ruins hidden beneath impenetrable thickets, of carved stones and slab paths hidden by vegetation. These voices, which for many were mere folk tales, lit a flame in him that would never be extinguished. In his diaries, he spoke of an ancient, sophisticated civilization capable of feats that did not fit with the conventional ideas of the Amazonian peoples. He called it Z, not for any particular symbolism, but as the final point on his personal map, the ultimate destination of his life. Fawcett was not naive. He rigorously studied every clue. He consulted 10th century Portuguese archives that spoke of a large and rich city in the depths of the Mato Grosso, known as Manuscript 512. This document, written by an anonymous explorer, described columns, statues, and refined architecture unlike anything the colonizers had encountered before. If this was true, it meant that the heart of South America had been home to cultures as advanced as those of Mesoamerica, but completely destroyed by time and the jungle. In 1925, more convinced than ever, Fawcett organized his last expedition. He was accompanied by his son Jack and young family friend, Rayleigh Ryle. They carried only the bare essentials in their backpacks, relying on the house and fishing. Fishing to survive, they ventured into the thicket, as if crossing a threshold into another era. After a few letters sent from the first camps, silence fell like a tombstone. They were never heard from again. The colonel's disappearance sparked a media frenzy that crossed oceans. Dozens of expeditions were sent to find them. Some failed, others also disappeared. In a few years, the legend grew to monumental proportions. For decades, theories multiplied. Some believed that Fawcett had been killed by hostile tribes, although no conclusive remains were ever found. Others imagined that he had achieved his goal, that he was living hidden in a civilization that preferred to remain on the fringes of the modern world. There were even those who claimed that he had crossed a threshold into another dimension. The jungle, unperturbed, kept its secret with the indifference of one who has seen centuries of oblivion pass by. Over time, the city of Z became part of the collective imagination, that nebulous frontier between archaeology and myth. But while many considered the story a romantic fantasy, science began to provide clues that reevaluated the old colonel's obsessions. Since the beginning of the 21st century, technologies such as ground-penetrating radar, which allows buried structures to be seen without the need for excavation, have revealed geometric patterns in the Amazon, remains of immense settlements, roads, squares, canals, signs of a much more organized and extensive than had been believed. In 2018, researchers found the remains of more than 60 archaeological sites in the southwestern Amazon, hidden by vegetation but aligned according to complex architectural principles. These were not isolated villages, but interconnected urban centers with evidence of urban planning. Fawcett's legends suddenly seemed less like madness. Perhaps there was not just one city of Za, but many. Perhaps what he sensed was not a monumental ruin like Teotihuacan or Angkor, but a completely different model of civilization, diffuse, dispersed, but interdependent. The Amazon rainforest, long considered a wild and historyless territory, is now revealed as an ecosystem deeply altered by human hands over centuries. Intensive farming systems, such as the fertile soils known as terra preta, suggest an advanced knowledge of agriculture and sustainability. These peoples did not just survive in the jungle, they transformed it. Their legacy was covered by the forest, not destroyed by ignorance. Despite these revelations, the figure of Percy Fawcett remains the most powerful shadow hanging over this story. His quest was not only archaeological, it was also symbolic. He represented the last archetype of the romantic explorer, the one who not only wants to discover the unknown, but to transform himself in the process. The city of Z, at its core, was a metaphor for perfection, for lost order, for a hidden utopia that would redeem the modern world with its ancient wisdom. Movies, books, and graphic novels quickly turned the story into legend. Fawcett himself was portrayed as a tragic hero halfway between Indiana Jones and Ulysses. But beyond the fiction lies the legacy of a bigger question. How many stories like this still await us beneath the undergrowth? How much of the past has been swallowed up by the jungle? Not by oblivion, but by the indifference of those who only looked toward visible empires. Today, every archaeological discovery in the Amazon seems to whisper that Percy Fawcett was right, at least in spirit. We may never know exactly what he saw or if he even came close to what he imagined, but his intuition has stood the test of time with a strange dignity. The lost city of Za, real or not, has fulfilled its deepest purpose, to wake us from our slumber and force us to look with new eyes at the oldest corners of the world. Because perhaps the greatest mysteries are not those that are solved, but those that teach us to search. The Great Pyramid of Giza, amid the eternal sands of the Egyptian desert, where time seems to float motionless and the wind whispers ancient secrets, stands a stone colossus that has defied logic, science, and imagination for millennia. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not just a funerary monument, as the books say, nor is it a simple legacy of an ancient civilization. It is a structure that has survived the passage of time, desert erosion, and the hands of man, keeping its mystery, purpose, and mathematical perfection intact. Built during the reign of Pharaoh Cheops around 2500 BCE, this pyramid represents the pinnacle of architectural knowledge of its time, but also an anomaly that continues to sow doubts even among the most rigorous experts. Its size is so imposing that for more than 3,000 years, it was believed to be the tallest structure on Earth. This pyramid represents the pinnacle of architectural knowledge of its time, but also an anomaly that continues to raise questions even among the most rigorous experts. Its size is so imposing that for more than 3,000 years, it was the tallest structure ever built by humans. And it's not just about its height, but the way in which more than 2 million blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing up to 70 tons, were placed with such precision that it is difficult to insert a razor blade between them. This accuracy, achieved with seemingly rudimentary tools, has generated an avalanche of theories, from the most conservative to the most extravagant. At first glance, the pyramid appears to be a simple geometric structure, a triangular shape repeated on 4 sides. But as you get closer, you discover that its complexity is astonishing. It is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points, with such minimal deviation that it could hardly be replicated today without the aid of modern technology. Some scholars have proposed that the ancient Egyptians may have used the stars to guide the construction, which would imply astronomical knowledge ahead of their time. Others suggest that they used projected shadows or primitive observation devices, but the truth continues to elude easy explanations. Inside the pyramid, the amazement continues. There are a series of passageways and internal chambers that, far from being simple stone corridors, reveal a meticulous intention in their design. The so-called Grand Gallery, a high, narrow passageway leading to the king's chamber, looks more like a ceremonial tunnel than a functional space. Inside, the resonance of sound changes as if each stone were tuned, as if the echo itself were participating in some unknown purpose. The ducts leading from the chambers to the outside have been interpreted as vents, but their alignment with certain stars has given rise to theories linking them to astronomical rituals or even a map of the sky carved in stone. The king's chamber, where the granite sarcophagus is located, is another enigma. It is situated at the heart of the pyramid, as if guarding this space had been the supreme objective of the entire construction. The curious thing is that despite archaeological efforts, no mummy has ever been found inside. The sarcophagus is empty, with no inscriptions or relics. This has led to speculation that the pyramid may never have been a tomb, or at least not a common tomb. Some theories suggest that it could have been a kind of energy temple, a device for channeling telluric forces, or even a structure designed to generate a form of energy based on resonance. These ideas, which border on the esoteric, are gaining ground because conventional methods cannot answer fundamental questions. How were the blocks transported from the quarries? Some are located hundreds of kilometers away. What kind of social and logistical organization was necessary to move millions of tons of stone with almost surgical precision? Some imagine giant ramps, rudimentary pulley systems, or even cranes made with the technology of the time. But none of these explanations are entirely convincing. The lack of inscriptions on the interior walls is also puzzling, as the Egyptians usually recorded their achievements with pride. In the Great Pyramid, there is absolute silence. No inscription celebrates its construction. No mural tells its story. Over time, the mystery has deepened. In recent years, explorations with thermal scanners and sensors have detected hidden cavities, spaces that do not appear on known plans and could be secret chambers never explored. Speculation is inevitable. They could be repositories of ancient knowledge, ritual chambers, or simply construction errors. No one knows, and the cautious Egyptian government remains closed to the possibility of excavating beyond what is permitted. The pyramid defends itself, as if the desert protects it not only from the elements, but also from the curious who seek to force its secrets. The most daring hypotheses speak of inherited knowledge, a forgotten wisdom that would have allowed such a structure to be built with laser precision. Some have even linked the pyramid to civilizations that predate the Egyptians, lost cultures that left fragments of their science hidden beneath the surface of the ancient world. There are those who have compared its proportions to mathematical constants, such as pi or the golden ratio, which would open the door to a more symbolic, almost universal dimension. According to this line of thinking, the pyramid is not an isolated construction, but part of an architectural code that points to a greater truth. However, there's also beauty in the unknown. Perhaps the most powerful thing about the Great Pyramid is not what it hides, but what it represents. A human will capable of imagining the impossible and turning it into stone. An ambition that defies the limits of time, transforming sand and rock into a perpetual monument. Because in the end, the Great Pyramid has not lost its power. It stands there motionless under the Egyptian sun, while civilizations come and go, while empires fall and centuries crumble like dust. Those who stands before it sees not only an ancient construction, but feels a weight, a vibration in the chest, a murmur that comes not from the wind or the past, but from something deeper, more alive. It is the certainty that there are still things we do not understand, that even surrounded by satellites and computers, we are still apprentices in the face of the world's oldest enigmas. The Great Pyramid of Giza does not need to speak. Its silence is the perfect language of mystery. And as long as it stands, it will continue to ask us questions without words. How much are we willing to see, to hear, to discover? The stones of Sakaiman, on the outskirts of Cuzco, where the altitude seems to touch the sky and the air has that sharpness found only at high altitudes. There's a place where time stands still, not because it is a ruin or because it has been swallowed up by oblivion, but because what remains standing seems to defy the most basic rules of logic. Saksai Juaman, with its monumental walls made of gigantic stones, is not only one of the most impressive works of ancient Peru, it is also one of the most persistent enigmas of the Andean past. When you stand in front of these cyclopean stones, polished with absurd precision, fitted together as if they were pieces of a puzzle carved by giants, the amazement is immediate and profound. Some blocks weigh more than 120 tons and are not placed at random, but with such refined aesthetic and structural intent that their shapes fit together with millimeter precision, without cement, without mortar, without error, as if those who placed them knew something we do not yet fully understand. Inca architecture, admired in many parts of the ancient empire, reaches its most extreme expression here. Unlike other more linear constructions, Saksai Juaman unfolds in undulating shapes, with walls that zigzag with disconcerting harmony, as if imitating the skin of a snake or the movement of the wind between the mountains. The design logic does not follow a repetitive pattern, but rather each stone seems to be a unique work molded to fit with its neighbors in a secret dialogue of angles, curves, and weight. These immense blocks were brought from quarries several kilometers away, dragged down steep slopes, lifted, and positioned without the aid of pulleys or modern metal tools. There are no written records detailing how all this was done, because the Incas did not use an alphabetic writing system. And although there are theories that speak of ramps, wooden rollers, and organized brute force, none can explain with certainty how such a level of precision was achieved without leaving a trace of error, without visible marks of cutting, without traces of improvisation. Many archaeologists agree that the perfection of Sacsayhuaman cannot be understood solely as a practical achievement. It was not just a matter of building earthquake-resistant walls, which they did better than many modern buildings, but of constructing something that had a symbolic, spiritual, perhaps even cosmic value. In the Andean worldview, stone was not a dead material, but a living being with energy and will. Carving a rock was not simply shaping it, but dialoguing with it, convincing it, harmonizing it with its surroundings and with the purpose of the whole. This way of understanding matter, completely different from Western utilitarian logic, could explain why the builders of Sacsayhuaman took the time to fit each stone as if it were a sacred act. And perhaps it is also the reason why the work conveys that sense of eternity. The stones are not there just because. They're in the exact place where they should be. For centuries, Sacsayhuaman was more than just a wall. It was a ceremonial space, a sacred fortress, a key point in the Inca network of power and wisdom. From its heights, the ancient capital of the empire is dominated, and many believe that its design responds to a greater logic in which Cuzco represents the navel of the world. Isaac Sayhuaman, the head of the puma, a central symbol in Andean iconography. The entire city seems to have been conceived as a sacred animal seen from the sky, which opens the door to even deeper interpretations of the level of astronomical and geometric knowledge possessed by its builders. And then there's the silence, that dense silence that envelopes the place, even when there are tourists walking among the stones. There's something ancestral about that stillness, as if the rocks themselves preserve the echoes of ritual chants, of voices that spoke in Quechua centuries ago, of the barefoot footsteps of priests and warriors. Some claim that Saxa and Juaman emit a peculiar vibration that can be felt in the hands when they are gently placed on the stones. These sensations cannot be explained by science, but they are there, alive, breathing through the granite. Some theories marginalized by academic discourse have put forward provocative hypotheses. It has been suggested that the Incas, or even cultures before them, may have used stone softening techniques, chemical or sound techniques that have been lost, which would have made it easier to shape the rock. These ideas, although rejected by many, arise from the amazement caused by the perfection of the joints, the lack of marks from conventional tools, and a symmetry that seems to have been calculated with precision instruments that did not exist at the time. Other researchers have compared Saxa and Juaman to similar constructions in other parts of the world. The polygonal walls of Japan, certain ruins in the Mediterranean, pre-Inca structures such as those at Pumapunku. While there is no concrete evidence of a connection between these cultures, the similarity of techniques raises questions about a possible shared architectural tradition passed down through the centuries, perhaps even older than we can imagine today. However, the greatest mystery of Saxium is not technical or logistical. It is human. It is the gap between what we think we know and what really happened. Because the Incas, regardless of all the theories, built something that has withstood the ravages of time, earthquakes, conquests, and neglect. Something that still stands, teaching without speaking, showing without imposing. The ability to raise stone upon stone to create a living ensemble that excites and disturbs those who observe it. It speaks of a knowledge that cannot be measured in titles or enclosed in display cases. When one leaves Saksai, Haman, after walking along its walls and feeling the cold of the stone on one's fingers, one is left with a certainty. Not everything we know about the past is written down. There are messages engraved in rock, in shapes, in silences. There are memories that do not fit in books, but continue to beat in places where history has not dissolved. And as long as those stones remain there, defying logic with their mere presence, Sacsayhuaman will continue to be what it has always been. A question turned into a mountain, an ancient lesson, still undeciphered. The Kailasa Eora Temple. Deep in the state of Maharashtra, in western India, there is a place where time seems to stand still, not because of the erosion of the centuries, but because of the sheer disbelief it arouses in those who behold it. The Kailasa Temple was not built, it was freed from the rock. And this is not poetic exaggeration. This stone colossus with its columns, sculptures, shrines, and pavilions was carved directly into the mountain from top to bottom, as if impossible hands had hollowed out a piece of earth with the same ease with which a sculptor molds clay. What remains is not a ruin or an abandoned temple, but an act of genius carved in stone. It is a feat that defies traditional categories of art, architecture, and engineering. The first impression Kailasa leaves is disconcerting. It does not seem human-made. No walls were erected, no stones were piled up, no foundations were laid. What one sees is sculpted emptiness, negative space turned into form. More than 200,000 tons of volcanic rock were removed to bring this marvel to life. And the most incredible thing is that it was done without dynamite, electric saws, or cranes. It is believed that the temple was created under the rule of King Krishna, around the 1st century, as a monumental offering to the god Shiva. But even if one accepts the date and historical context, it is hard to imagine how such an undertaking was organized and executed. Kailasa is not simply large, it is complex. It has multiple levels, courtyards, galleries, figures of mythological animals, carvings of gods and demons, entire scenes from sacred texts such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. All of this is fused into a visual narrative that runs through every corner of the temple. There are no easy repetitions or hasty strokes. Every inch was thought out. Each sculpture was integrated into an overall choreography, as if someone had seen the finished work before beginning to carve. It is this overall vision that is as surprising as the execution. A master plan in 3 dimensions, executed by hand, with no margin for error. There are many extraordinary works in the ancient world, but Kailasa occupies a special place because its creation is literally contrary to everything we understand by architecture. There is no other construction in known history that has been carried out in this way, with this level of detail and on this scale. Some archaeologists believe that the work must have taken decades, even centuries, while others argue that, given its stylistic consistency, it must have been done in a shorter period. The latter idea suggests that hundreds, perhaps thousands, of craftsmen worked simultaneously, carving the rock tirelessly, guided by almost miraculous coordination. How did they avoid mistakes? How did they ensure that the proportions remained perfect as they descended from the top of the mountain to the ground? The main temple is flanked by huge pillars, life-size sculpted elephants, and secondary pavilions, all carved from the same mass of stone. There are no joints. Everything springs from the rock as if it were part of the same mind, of a single intention. It is as if the temple had not been made, but discovered, as if it had always been there, waiting to be freed from the confinement of the stone. Beyond the technical aspect, the spiritual significance of Kailasa is just as profound. In Hindu tradition, Mount Kailash is the abode of Shiva, an inaccessible sacred place surrounded by legend. Building its replica on Earth was not just a religious feat, it was also a way of bringing the divine to the human plane. And when you look at the temple, you understand that this ambition was not symbolic. The place exudes a sense of presence, of spiritual intensity that needs no explanation. There is something about the scale, the silence of its walls, the density of its forms, that makes even the most skeptical visitors lower their voices upon entering. Over the centuries, the temple survived monsoons, looting, changes of empire, and abandonment. It was excavated, abandoned, and rediscovered more than once. And yet its structure remains intact, as if the stone itself resists aging. The carvings, though eroded in places, retain an expressive power not easily found in other temples. The faces of the deities, the dynamic postures of the celestial warriors, the details of the clothing. Everything speaks of a time when art and devotion went hand in hand and perfection was not a goal but an obligation. One of the most intriguing aspects of Kailasa is that it is not alone. It is part of the Ellora complex, a group of more than 30 temples and monasteries carved into the same hillside, belonging to 3 different religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. This fact alone is remarkable, but it is even more so when one considers that these temples coexisted in harmony for centuries, at a time when other parts of the world were marked by religious wars. Ellora represents a model of spiritual coexistence, a kind of sacred laboratory where different paths to eternity were explored, and the Kailasa temple was undoubtedly its central jewel. Over time, many have tried to unravel the secrets of Kailasa. Some have been carried away by theories that border on the fantastic. Lost civilizations with lost technologies, knowledge that came from the sky, telluric energies that guided the hands of craftsmen. And although many of these ideas have no academic backing, the simple existence of the temple challenges the limits of what we believe possible. Even if we accept that everything was done with hammers, chisels, and infinite patience, the result still seems like a miracle. Today, Kailasa still stands, not as a silent relic, but as an open challenge. Every visitor who walks through it with open eyes and an open heart takes away something different: an image, a feeling, a question. Because Kailasa cannot be exhausted by technical explanations or historical analysis. It is a place to be experienced, felt, and kept deep within, without needing to understand it completely. Perhaps that is what makes it so powerful. The Kailasa temple is proof that there are things that human beings can achieve when they believe in something greater than themselves. It is a work where the spiritual and the material merge in a living stone and where the impossible was somehow made real. The Yonaguni Monument, southwest of the Japanese archipelago. Where the waters of the Pacific Ocean merge with the deep blue of the East China Sea, lies Yonaguni, a small island battered by the winds of time and surrounded by a cloak of mystery. There, beneath the constant waves and relentless currents, lies a group of underwater structures that have divided scientists, archaeologists, divers, and even the inhabitants of the region themselves. What lies submerged at this point on the map is unlike anything seen before. Since its discovery, the Yonaguni Monument has been hailed as one of the great geological and archaeological enigmas of the modern world. It was in 1986 when Kijichiro Aratake, a local diver exploring the area in search of hammerhead sharks, descended on one of his regular dives and came across something completely unexpected. Before him lay what appeared to be step platforms, smooth walls with right angles, precisely carved stairways, and shapes that clearly evoked human intervention. He was not looking at simple rocks. That much was obvious. That discovery lit a flame that has continued to burn over time. Since then, the site has been the subject of study, debate, and speculation. The structure, located about 20 meters below the surface, appears to be composed of a series of flat terraces, defined edges, and cuts that seem too perfect to be the product of natural chance. Some blocks appear to have been separated with such precision that it is difficult to believe that the sea and erosion were the only architects. The first thing that comes to mind when seeing the images is that it is some kind of pyramid or sunken city, an ancient settlement that was trapped under the sea by some cataclysm, an eastern Atlantis that defies the dates and certainties of the archaeological record. Professor Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist at Ryukyu University, was one of the first to study the site closely and quickly concluded that it was an artificial structure. For him, the tool marks, the engravings that appear to represent animals and symbols, and the overall layout of the monument are evidence that someone thousands of years ago worked the rock with a clear purpose. According to his estimates, the monument could be more than 10,000 years old, a date that, if true, would completely change what we know about human civilizations in that region of the world. However, many experts have responded with skepticism. Some geologists insist that the set of visible shapes in Yonaguni can be explained by geological processes known as the combined action of tectonic fractures, marine erosion, and sedimentation. According to this perspective, what are perceived as stairways and straight platforms are the result of the natural fragmentation of sandstone, a formation that tends to break into straight lines due to its internal structure. Such formations, they claim, have been observed in other parts of the world, both under the sea and on the surface. But there is something about Yonaguni that defies purely geological logic. There are details that do not quite fit. There have been reports of what appear to be paths, channels, a large solitary pillar, and even a cavity resembling a tunnel or entrance. These features raise more questions than answers. In addition, some researchers have pointed out that the lines and angles of the monument seem to follow consistent geometric patterns, something uncommon in natural formations, where irregularity is usually the norm. As more Busos and scholars have examined the site, the debate has gained momentum and complexity. For proponents of the artificial theory, Yonaguni's monument could be proof of a lost civilization, a maritime culture that existed in the region before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower and large areas of land now submerged were inhabited. According to this view, the rise of the oceans would have buried entire villages underwater, taking with them the traces of a history yet to be told. In this context, Yonaguni would not be an isolated case, but part of a network of underwater structures yet to be discovered in the seas of East Asia. The truth is that science sometimes moves slower than the imagination. While data is cautiously accumulated and academic publications hesitate to confirm the extraordinary, the monument remains there, defying the gaze and provoking those who dare to study it. Each dive is an opportunity to discover a new angle, a hidden surface, a shadow that seems to conceal a carved figure. But it is also a unique sensory experience. Seeing Varen underwater amid swirling fish and rays of light piercing the sea like crystal spears produces a mixture of vertigo and reverence. There is something ancestral about these submerged stones, something that speaks to the deepest instinct of human beings, that which seeks to understand their place in the history of the world. For the local inhabitants, the monument has taken on an almost mystical dimension. Some claim that their grandparents already spoke of ruins under the sea, of fallen gods and cities swallowed by the waves. Others have incorporated the site into their legends, giving it a sacred value that escapes technical language. At the crossroads between myth and evidence lies much of Yonaguni's magic. It is a real, tangible place, but shrouded in a mist of possibilities that does not easily dissipate. Today, more than 3 decades after its discovery, the monument remains one of the most enigmatic submerged structures on the planet. There is no consensus, no definitive ruling. There are those who will continue to believe that it is a simple geological coincidence magnified by human fascination, while others are convinced that it is the footprint of a civilization that the ocean covered but did not erase. What is certain is that Yonaguni reminds us how little we know about our own past, and how many pieces of the puzzle still lie hidden beneath the waters of the world. Perhaps the most important thing about this enigma is not to solve it, but to let it push us to look beyond the surface, to question our learned certainties, and to keep our curiosity alive, because in the end, that is what makes great mysteries endure. They cannot be fully explained. They are felt, explored, dreamed of, and Yonaguni, from the depths of the Japanese Sea, continues to wait for someone to one day tell its complete story. The Baghdad Battery. On the outskirts of Baghdad, at some point in the 1930s, a routine archaeological find sparked one of the most provocative debates of the century. On a small hill near what was once the ancient city of Font, capital of the Parthian Empire, workers excavating the site unearthed a strange ceramic vessel, unaware that they had just discovered an object that would challenge the conventional account of ancient technology. The piece, simple at first glance, concealed within it a copper cylinder and an iron rod, carefully assembled. This curious artifact, known since then as the Baghdad Battery, has divided opinion for decades, fueling hypotheses and leaving an essential question unanswered. Was it possible that the ancients had known about electricity? The vessel, about 15 centimeters high, looks harmless. Its design is not particularly beautiful, nor does its ornamentation indicate a ceremonial purpose. However, when carefully dismantled, what is found inside is what has caused all the commotion. A copper cylinder housed vertically inside the vessel, sealed with bitumen and pierced by a thin iron rod. The arrangement is reminiscent of a galvanic cell, a basic battery design that, when filled with an acidic or alkaline liquid, such as vinegar or lemon juice, generates a small electrical voltage. It is a mechanism as elementary as it is effective, and the question arises not as a whim, but as a direct consequence. What were the Parthians doing with a battery more than 2,000 years before the formal development of electricity? Initial studies were led by Wilhelm Koenig, a director of the National Museum of Iraq, who examined the pieces with amazement and proposed the idea that would mark the debate. The Baghdad Battery could have been used to deliver small electric shocks. Perhaps, he suggested, it was used to galvanize metals, that is, to cover objects with a layer of gold or silver using an electric current. This possibility, backed by modern experiments that managed to reproduce similar results with replicas of the artifact, opened a huge door to the unknown. If this technology existed, what other things could they have developed that remain forgotten under the earth today? As expected, the academic world reacted with caution. Some archaeologists and scientists considered the hypothesis too bold and proposed alternative interpretations. Perhaps it was a simple storage container, a ritual urn, or a medicinal item whose function was lost over time. It is true that no remains of wires or connections were found, nor any other electrical devices that would point to widespread use of energy in that society. And without that broader context, suggesting that it was a battery seemed to many to be an exaggerated extrapolation. However, skepticism has not been enough to extinguish interest, because the piece is there, it continues to be studied, and its design does not change with opinions. Replicas of the artifact built by various researchers and curious individuals have shown that the voltage generated is real. It is not an impressive figure, around 1 or 2 volts, but it is energy after all. Enough, for example, to cause a small electric sensation on contact with the skin, or to cause a chemical reaction that deposits a metallic layer on another object. And this is where the mystery intensifies. If the design works, if modern tests confirm its potential, how can we explain its existence at a time when the phenomenon of electricity was supposedly completely unknown? Some defenders of the battery theory as a functional tool have pointed out that the ancient Persians, or even the Mesoamericans, could have discovered it. Potential. How can we explain its existence in an era when the phenomenon of electricity was supposedly completely unknown? Some proponents of the theory of the battery as a functional tool have pointed out that the ancient Parthians, or even the Moors, may have discovered the effects of certain metals and liquids empirically, without understanding the principles behind them. In other words, they may have known what worked without knowing why. This type of knowledge accumulated through observation and practical experimentation would not be unprecedented in history. Many ancient techniques, such as pigment manufacturing, essence distillation, or advanced metallurgy, emerged long before the laws explaining them were formulated. The difference here lies in the nature of the phenomenon. The electricity we associate with the modern world seems too advanced to be the product of a civilization that left no written records of such knowledge. But the story does not end there. Some go further and link the Baghdad battery to a possible chain of lost knowledge, a line of development that failed to prosper for historical reasons, wars, looting, or simple neglect. This idea, although it cannot be proven with direct evidence, finds some resonance in other cases where surprising technologies appeared in isolation in the past, such as the Antikythera mechanism or certain surgical tools found in Roman tombs. These are loose pieces, fragments of a larger puzzle that we may never see complete. In the case of the battery, what keeps the controversy alive is not only its potential functionality, but the void surrounding its purpose. There is no definitive explanation that closes the case, and that open space fuels both speculation and wonder. Perhaps it is precisely this ambiguity that makes it a perfect symbol of ancient mysteries, objects that don't fit, that defy accepted chronologies, that appear without warning and force us to reconsider what we take for granted. Over time, the Baghdad battery has transcended scientific circles. It has been the subject of documentaries, novels, and theories that push the boundaries of what is acceptable. It has even been linked to theories about ancient contact with more advanced civilizations, although these ideas rarely find support among experts. Even so, the artifact persists as a disturbing element, as if its mere existence suggests that the past was much more complex than we tend to admit. Today, the original piece is no longer in its museum. After the invasion of Iraq in 2003, many objects from the National Museum of Baghdad were looted or destroyed, and their current whereabouts are uncertain. This loss is not only patrimonial, but also symbolic. An object that represents the mystery of what was possible has disappeared, as if time itself had decided to keep it secret. But the questions, images, documents, and replicas survive, and with them the spark of doubt that continues to burn. We may never know for sure who made the Baghdad battery or why. Perhaps it was an accident, a coincidence that time has magnified. Or perhaps it was part of a deeper knowledge, a science that hinted at itself and then disappeared. In any case, its story continues to be told. And that in itself is a form of energy, the electricity of mystery, the current that continues to flow through the centuries, waiting for someone who dares to connect the wires of the past. The Antikythera mechanism at the bottom of the Sea Egeo, trapped among the rusted remains of a Roman shipwreck that had been hidden for centuries by the currents and silence, was something that seemed out of place in its time. A set of corroded gears, pieces of bronze fused together by the passage of centuries, a structure that at first was seen as a shapeless mass, like a fragment of machinery without purpose. It was 1901, and the sponge fishermen who found it never imagined that they had just set in motion one of the greatest archaeological revolutions of the 20th century. That object, recovered among broken amphorae, statues, and remnants of ancient trade, will become known as the Antikythera mechanism. From the beginning, it was an anomaly. Its presence did not fit in with the rest of the finds, and what was most puzzling was not its shape, but its complexity. As studies progressed, what at first appeared to be an unrecognizable artifact began to reveal an astonishing internal mechanism. Perfectly toothed gears, interconnected wheels of different sizes, numbered scales, and tiny inscriptions were all part of a device with a technical precision that, according to official accounts at the time, should not have existed in that era. The shipwreck from which it was extracted dates back to approximately the 1st century BC. And yet, the mechanism, in its essence, anticipates technological developments that would not be seen again for at least 100 years. It is as if someone had left a Renaissance machine forgotten in the days of the Roman Empire. Comparisons with 17th century astronomical clocks are inevitable. But what is truly striking is that the Antikythera mechanism was not a decorative piece or a useless imitation. It was a functional astronomical calculator capable of predicting planetary movements, solar and lunar eclipses, and even marking the dates of the Olympic Games. We're not talking about a simple machine. The mechanism contained more than 30 bronze gears, some of them extremely small, hand-carved with a precision that required advanced tools and knowledge of mathematics applied to circular motion. Studies using X-rays, three-dimensional tomography, and digital modeling have made it possible to reconstruct much of its structure, revealing a multi-level design that mechanically reproduced the movement of celestial bodies. What this artifact achieved was to simulate the cosmos with gears, a profoundly modern idea born from a mind that understood the universe as a logical, orderly, and predictable system. For a long time, ancient history was told to us on the premise that the technical knowledge of the Greeks and Romans was limited to the basic principles of geometry, architecture, and natural philosophy. Their genius was recognized, but they were presented as observers rather than engineers. The Antikythera mechanism blew that view apart. It showed us that someone in some corner of the Hellenistic world had conceived of a way to represent time and the sky through a machine that could also be manipulated by a crank, allowing astronomical events to be calculated into the past or future. A kind of mechanical computer 2,000 years before the birth of computing. The question then became inevitable. Who made it? The clues are scarce, but the Greek inscriptions, the names of the months, and the astronomical terms suggest a clear origin in the Hellenistic world, perhaps Alexandria or Rhodes, centers of knowledge where science and the arts intertwined naturally. Some researchers have suggested that the machine may have been designed under the influence of Hipparchus, the great astronomer who described the precession of the equinoxes. Others point to the school of Archimedes, whose fame as an inventor and mathematician would fit perfectly with a device of this nature. However, the most puzzling thing is not so much who made it, but why that knowledge disappeared. How is it possible that such advanced technology, capable of combining astronomy, mechanics, and mathematics with such a level of sophistication, left no trace in the centuries that followed? Why don't we find more similar mechanisms in other places or nearby periods? Some speculate that these types of artifacts were extremely rare, made to order, intended for a very small group of enlightened elites. Others believe that the knowledge needed to build it was destroyed in the burning of the Library of Alexandria or simply fell into oblivion as wars, political collapses, and cultural changes swept away the pillars of accumulated knowledge. It is a painful reminder that history is not always a continuous progression. Sometimes humanity reaches extraordinary heights, and then regresses, forgetting how it got there. The anti-aging mechanism is proof of a lost peak of a time when human ingenuity was capable of transforming the skies into gears. And although today we contemplate it through glass and display cases, with the fragility of a 1,000-year-old object damaged by the sea, its presence remains powerful. Because it is not just an artifact, it is an idea made metal, an idea that survived storms, centuries, and ignorance. In recent years, the fascination with this mechanism has grown exponentially. International teams have worked for decades to understand how it works. Each advance in their analysis has revealed new levels of complexity. Epicyclic gears, lunar phase indicators, even a system for correcting the apparent speed of the moon according to its elliptical orbit, something that was only formally understood much later. Current models of its operation have made it possible to reproduce the machine faithfully, although there are still missing pieces that keep certain questions open. Most strikingly, the Antikythera mechanism has forced science to reconsider what kind of knowledge ancient cultures really had. It is not enough to say that they were intelligent. We must accept that their understanding of the world could be translated into precise, complex, and beautiful technology. And although they did not have electricity or microchips, they had a way of thinking about time and space that is not so different from ours. Today, the mechanism remains one of the most valuable treasures of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. It is kept there under controlled lighting, protected from humidity, fragmented into pieces that still retain the patina of the sea. But beyond its appearance, what really endures is what it represents. The possibility that history is full of unexpected gaps, of achievements that do not fit into the straight lines we tend to draw. The Antikythera mechanism is an ancient voice speaking to us from the depths of the sea and time. And as long as we continue to listen, as long as we continue to reconstruct its message, there will be hope that we can understand something more about ourselves, about what we were capable of imagining, and perhaps about what we can still achieve. Because if an ancient civilization could capture the sky in a box of gears, perhaps we are not so far from remembering what we once were. The Longyu Caves in the Chinese province of Zhejiang, in a corner that for centuries went unnoticed among rice fields, villages, and gentle mountains, are now one of the most puzzling discoveries of recent times. This mystery did not appear on Earth thanks to the hands of archaeologists, nor was it anticipated by ancient chronicles, but emerged by chance when villagers decided to drain a pond in the mid-1990s. They wanted to fish. What they found completely changed the image of the land they had walked on all their lives. Beneath the surface, where they expected to find mud and rocks, the entrance to an artificial cave carved with pinpoint precision was revealed. What looked like a simple water well from the outside actually concealed the mouth of a hand-carved underground world, an immense complex that was unparalleled in the region or anywhere else known. Soon other caves were discovered, 1, then 2, then 20, until a total of more than 30 spaces were found carved into the solid rock, all with similar structures but unique in their layout. The Longyu Caves, named after the county where they were found, are colossal in size. Some are 30 meters deep with ceilings that rise like majestic vaults supported by perfectly symmetrical solid pillars. The entire interior is carved with astonishing precision. The walls, ceilings, and floors share the same pattern of parallel lines carved diagonally, a kind of rhythmic texture that runs across the surface as if it were the mark of a constant tool, repeated relentlessly for months, perhaps, even years. The regularity of this detail is so precise that it appears to have been made by a machine, although analysis clearly shows that it was carved by hand. The most fascinating thing is not only the scale or the technique, but the total absence of references. No document, no ancient text, no engraving mentions these constructions. For a culture like China, which has left detailed records of almost every aspect of its history, this omission is deeply strange. The caves appear to have been built by a ghostly civilization, one that did not want to or could not leave a record of its achievement. There are no remains of tools, No traces of smoke, no skeletons, no signs of life inside. Only empty, perfect stone. Engineers who have studied the site agree on one thing. Doing this today, with modern technology, would be a colossal task. It is estimated that each cave required the extraction of tens of thousands of cubic meters of stone, which would have involved the work of hundreds of people over many years. And yet, not a single piece of rubble has been found. All the excavated material disappeared without a trace. There are no mountains of waste around the area. There are no obvious deposits, as if the rocks had simply vanished in a thin air. The design of the caves also raises suspicions of highly advanced planning, although they all have a similar structure, with access steps, columns, and internal chambers, each oriented differently, with no obvious alignments between them. This suggests that each cave was conceived as an autonomous space, even though they share the same architectural language. Some have platforms that look like stages or altars. Others have channels carved into the floor that could have been used to drain water or for more symbolic purposes. And in the deepest ones, the echo behaves in a peculiar way, as if the acoustics have been studied in detail. Among the theories proposed to explain their function, there is a wide range. Some believe they were secret storage rooms, shelters from disasters, or burial chambers for unknown elites. Others suggest that they were temples, places of worship dedicated to practices lost in time. There has also been talk of centers of knowledge, underground observatories, or even ritual constructions where ceremonies requiring total isolation from the outside world were performed. But none of this can be confirmed because there is no clear evidence, only space, stone, and silence. The most daring hypothesis holds that the caves could be the work of a culture that predates China's written history, an ancient civilization that disappeared without leaving a legacy, whose technical knowledge was buried along with its intentions. In this context, Longu would be a relic of a past deeper than we believe, a fragment of a forgotten humanity, erased by the centuries and the transformations of the world. This idea, although seductive, has not been accepted by the academic world, which prefers to keep the mystery in the safe realm of undocumented ancient construction. The truth is that the Longu caves defy the expectations of any visitor. Upon entering, the air changes. Sound is subtly muffled, as if the walls absorb voices. Natural light dissolves into soft shadows that accentuate the geometry of the space. And there's something in the atmosphere, a kind of thick stillness that makes one move more slowly, as if the place imposes its own rhythm. It is not difficult to imagine that activities requiring concentration, solemnity, or secrecy were carried out here. During the first years after their discovery, the local government promoted the caves as a tourist attraction. Walkways were installed, the interior was illuminated, and the site gained fame among curious visitors and travelers. But despite the interest, serious studies have progressed slowly. There is no official excavation underway. There is no international team dedicated to unraveling their origin. It is as if the mystery is more uncomfortable than it is motivating, as if it were preferable to leave the caves where they are, without questions, without overly ambitious theories. There is an implicit lesson in all this. The Longu caves do not shout their mystery. They do not impose themselves dramatically. They are discreet, silent, profound. Their enigma does not come from exaggeration, but from their very existence. They are there, carved into solid rock, and that is enough. There is no need for stories of extraterrestrials, impossible theories, or added mythology. The fact that they exist without a clear explanation is enough to take our breath away. And perhaps that silence is their greatest power. The Longu caves force us to confront the limits of what we know and understand about the human past. They remind us that beneath our feet there may be untold stories, feats that left no words, only traces in stone, and that from time to time a simple pond can hide the entrance to a world waiting to be discovered. The Dropa stones in the far reaches of the Himalayas, where mountains touch the sky with their snow-capped peaks, and the air seems to have been filtered by centuries of silence. There is a story that has traveled the world shrouded in mystery, controversy, and a persistent feeling that there is more than what we have been told. A story that begins with an expedition, a forgotten cave, and a discovery that no one could comfortably classify. Thus were born the legends surrounding the so-called Dropa stones, an enigma that to this day teeters on the edge between myth and possibility. The story begins, according to the most well-known accounts, in 1938, when a group of Chinese archaeologists, led by Professor Chaputi, ventured into the Bayan Kerala Mountains, a remote region in northern Tibet. They were looking for traces of ancient human settlements, caves used by nomadic peoples, or perhaps tombs hidden by time. What they found was something else entirely. In a series of caves dug into the side of a mountain, they discovered tiny skeletons, fragile bodies with disproportionately large skulls and bone structures that did not match any known population in the region. Surrounding these remains, dozens of circular stones lay on the dusty ground, perfectly round, flat, with a hole in the center and spiral grooves that appeared to have been engraved with precision. They were stone discs similar in shape to vinyl records, but with a surface marked by fine lines that, according to those who examined them, contained a tiny, unknown writing. More than 600 pieces were found, each slightly different, although all shared the same structure and that mysterious spiral that researchers at the time were unable to decipher. The story took an unexpected turn when it was claimed that after years of study, part of the text had finally been translated. This is where the story begins to stray from the usual framework of archaeology. According to the alleged results of that translation, the discs narrated the arrival of a race of beings from another planet, the Dropa, whose spacecraft had crashed in that mountainous area some 12,000 years ago. Unable to return, these beings had been trapped on Earth, forced to live with the local tribes. The story told of their suffering, their attempts to integrate, and the conflicts they faced. All of this was recorded on stone discs that no one expected to find in that place. As might be expected, this story was received with a mixture of fascination and rejection. For many scientists, it was a modern fable, a fabrication with no verifiable basis, fueled by the desire to find evidence of contact with non-human intelligences. There were no formal academic records of the discovery, and the protagonists of the story, including Professor Chaputi, were shrouded in a fog of anonymity or disappearance. Some versions claim that the investigation was suppressed by the Chinese authorities, while others maintain that no such excavation ever took place. However, the story did not die. In the following decades, various authors took up the subject again. In 1965, Russian journalist Seev published an article that reignited the case, claiming that the Dropa stones were real and that their contents had been confirmed by Soviet experts. The article appeared in a widely circulated magazine and captured the attention of the international public. Although the physical evidence was never officially exhibited, nor were any conclusive studies presented to the scientific community, the story lived on in books, documentaries, and lectures. There is something about this story that makes it difficult to forget. Perhaps it is the perfect combination of the archaeological and the impossible, of a forgotten civilization and a visit from beyond. Perhaps it is the feeling that among so many ruins there are clues that point to an alternative history, to a past broader than our mental maps allow us to accept. Because if the Dropa stones were real, if they really contained writing of unknown origin and a coherent narrative about visitors from space, we would be looking at one of the most important discoveries in human history. On the other hand, there is no shortage of people who think that this is simply a skillfully constructed modern legend. The stones, they say, could have been manufactured as ritual objects by local cultures. And the story of extraterrestrial contact would be a later invention, a contemporary reading projected onto ancient artifacts. It's a reasonable explanation, especially in a world where the line between reality and myth is easily blurred. But even from this more skeptical perspective, the Dropa stones phenomenon remains fascinating. Why invent such a story? What need was there to imagine such a specific story with names, dates, and technical details? And above all, Why has it endured for so long? Amidst all this, what remains constant is the mystery. No one has presented definitive proof to confirm or disprove the existence of the discs. There is no public access to the alleged original pieces, and attempts to track down their location have always ended in dead ends. There are photographs, yes, but they are few and do not always match each other. Some claim to have seen the discs in small museums, in private collections, in forgotten archives, but there is never any verifiable evidence to settle the debate. And perhaps that is precisely the point. The Dropa stones are not important only for what they might be, but for what they represent. They are a symbol of all the missing pieces in the puzzle of our history, of all the unanswered questions, of all the stories that were left out because they did not fit into the official narrative. They represent that blurred line between the possible and the improbable, between the documented and the imagined. And it is in that space that the most provocative ideas are sometimes found. Perhaps one day the stones will turn up in a forgotten excavation, in a collection rescued from dust, in the archives of a university that doesn't even know what it has. Perhaps not. Perhaps the story will remain up in the air like so many others orbiting around mystery without ever touching the ground. But while that happens, the story will continue to be told because there are stories that stand the test of time, not because of what they prove, but because of what they awaken in those who hear them. The Dropa stones are one such story. Whether real or not, it reminds us that the past still holds secrets, and that some of them are engraved in stone spirals waiting for someone to read them again someday. The London Hammer, in the vast landscape of Texas, where the earth still holds fragments of a distant past, and the horizon seems to merge with the dust of centuries, an object was found that from the first moment seemed out of context, out of place, uncomfortable in the face of any attempt to place it in time. The find did not occur in a laboratory, nor was it unearthed by a professional archaeologist. As in so many other episodes that border on the improbable, it was discovered by chance, as if mystery always chose to reveal itself where no one expected it. The year was 1936. A family was walking near the small town of London, in the state of Texas, when they noticed something strange sticking out of a rock formation. It was a broken stone, and inside it was the unthinkable, a hammer, not a rudimentary tool carved from stone or bone, but a hammer with a metal head, and a wooden handle, perfectly recognizable, so modern in appearance that anyone would have sworn it was a common object, perhaps forgotten decades ago, rusted by the passage of time and buried by the whims of nature. But the surprise did not end there. The rock in which the hammer was embedded was later analyzed and, according to various geological studies, belonged to a formation dating back some 100 million years. It was hardened sedimentary rock from the lower Cretaceous period, a time when, to the best of our knowledge, humans did not exist, nor did tools, nor even the possibility of a civilization manufacturing something like this. And yet there was the hammer, trapped inside a natural capsule, as if time had mocked its own logic. The object was not ignored. It caught the attention of scientists, curious onlookers, religious figures, and mystery enthusiasts. The composition of the metal was studied, the petrified wood of the handle was examined, oxidation levels were measured, and speculation about its origin ran rampant. Some claimed that the hammer was proof that human or humanoid civilizations already existed in deep prehistory, long before any history book dares to teach. Others, with a more skeptical approach, proposed alternative explanations, that the hammer was a modern tool that, due to a rare combination of geological conditions, became trapped in a process of rapid concretion, giving it its appearance of antiquity. The truth is that to this day, no one has been able to provide a definitive answer. The piece is kept in what has been called the Museum of Creation Evidence, a small facility in Texas where objects that challenge conventional theories of evolution and human history are on display. The hammer has been used by many as a symbol of a different narrative, one that suggests that humanity's past could be much older, more complex, and more surprising than science has been willing to admit. And yet, we must be careful, because conflicting versions, contradictory studies, unsupported claims, and much speculation have been woven around the London hammer. Some geologists argue that the type of concretion in which the hammer was found can form in decades, or even less time, depending on the mineral conditions of the soil, humidity, and interaction with organic materials. From this perspective, there would be no need to go back millions of years to explain its existence. The anomaly would then be the coincidence, the way it became encased in the rock, not its actual age. But even if that version is true, if the hammer is indeed modern, and what is impressive is its casing, the story still has special value, because the mystery does not lie solely in the age of the object, but in the way certain pieces seem to appear right at the edges of knowledge, in those spaces where certainty breaks down and possibility reopens. The story of the hammer would not be that of an ancient tool, but that of a powerful symbol. A question with no clear answer, a catalog error that refuses to disappear. Over the decades, the hammer has been cited in books, articles, and documentaries as one of the so-called UArts, objects out of place, those pieces that apparently should not be where they are. And although many of these cases have been explained or discredited, their mere existence forces us to consider the fragility of our historical models. It reminds us that for every established truth, there are exceptions, ruptures, anomalies that push us to look further. If you look closely at the hammer, there is nothing particularly extraordinary about its shape. It is a common, functional tool with an iron head and a wooden handle worn down by time. But that is precisely what is so puzzling, that something so common is where it shouldn't be, that the object, rather than representing an amazing technological leap, causes a temporal dissonance, as if time had collapsed at a point and the impossible had found a way to manifest itself without making a sound. There is a particular beauty in these kinds of mysteries, not because they give us answers, but because they give us back our doubts, because we cannot simply nod and accept an explanation. We have to stop, question, compare. And in a world where everything seems to have already been answered, that is valuable. Perhaps the London hammer will not change the history of humanity. Perhaps we will never know for sure how it got there, or whether it is as old as some suggest. But its history, its discovery, its context remain a crack in the official narrative, and it is sometimes through these cracks that the light of the unknown shines through. Ultimately, the hammer is there, preserved, exhibited, discussed, and has become much more than a tool. It is a point of friction between science and intuition, between the official narrative and the impulse to imagine other possibilities. And as long as it continues to raise questions, as long as its story remains open, it will continue to be important. Because there are objects that, beyond their usefulness or origin, have the ability to open doors. Doors to wonder, to curiosity, to the uncomfortable and wonderful feeling that we don't know everything yet. The crystal skulls. They are objects that seem made to provoke wonder, pieces whose mere existence makes us uncomfortable because they don't fit in with established ideas or with the tools available at the time they were supposedly created. The crystal skulls belong to this category. They are artifacts that not only arouse curiosity because of their perfect shape and polished material, but also because of the mystery that surrounds them, as if each one had emerged from a forgotten corner of time, crossing the ages without deteriorating, without explanation, without clear context. The most famous of all was the one that gave rise to the modern myth, the so-called crystal skull of Mitchell Hayes. According to the story popularized by Anna Mitchell Hayes, it was found in the 1920s during an archaeological expedition in the ruins of Luba Untu, an ancient Mayan city located in Belize. She claimed that the skull was buried among the rubble of the main temple, and that when she found it, it glowed so brightly in the sunlight that it seemed to be alive. Its transparency, anatomically precise shape, and the fact that it was made from a single block of pure quartz immediately gave it a legendary aura. Weighing over 5 kilograms and with a finish so detailed that it even reproduces the junction of the jaws, the piece soon became an icon. No visible tool marks or signs of mechanical polishing were found. According to initial studies, It would have taken hundreds, perhaps thousands, of hours of manual labor to achieve such a level of perfection. But there was something else that was even more puzzling. Upon analyzing the quartz, it was discovered that the crystal structure of the piece was oriented in the opposite direction to the carving. This meant that any undue pressure during the process would have caused it to break. And yet there it was, intact, precise, without a single crack. This detail gave rise to one of the most repeated and commented hypotheses, that the skull was actually created using lost knowledge or technology. Some spoke of vibrations, others of concentrated sound or light. The most extreme theories even proposed extraterrestrial origins, arguing that the ancient Mesoamerican peoples had received these pieces as a legacy from visitors from other worlds. Although these ideas lack evidence, they have been part of the magnetism that has kept the story of the skulls alive. Over time, others appeared, some in private collections, others sold at auction, others exhibited in museums. There is talk of 13 skulls in total scattered around the world, each with similar characteristics. Rock crystal, impeccably polished, human proportions, and a supposed origin in Central America. Some are made of clear quartz, others of milky quartz. None have inscriptions. None come with clear documents certifying their archaeological provenance. Everything surrounding these pieces is marked by silence and ambiguity. Science, for its part, has tried to demystify the phenomenon. At the end of the 20th century, the British Museum and the Smithsonian Institute conducted detailed studies on several of these skulls. They used electron microscopes to analyze the surfaces and found marks from rotating tools, suggesting that they were carved with modern technology, probably during the 19th century. These results indicated that the skulls, impressive as they are, did not belong to pre-Columbian cultures, but were elaborate fakes made in Europe, probably in the context of the boom in Mesoamerican mysteries. However, the conclusions did not end the debate. Some pieces have not yet been analyzed, and the Meitel-Hegyi skull, the most controversial of all, has never been subjected to a completely independent examination. Anna defended the skull's authenticity until her death with a passion that bordered on the mystical. She claimed that the object had healing properties, that it produced intense dreams, and that it interfered with electronic devices. People who visited her claimed to feel a presence when they touched it, a strange energy that was impossible to describe. Over the years, the skull ceased to be simply a sculpture. It became a symbol. The myth of the crystal skulls took on a life of its own. Some linked it to Mayan prophecies, claiming that the 13 skulls would one day be reunited to reveal hidden knowledge, a message for humanity. Others claimed that they contained information stored in their molecular structure, as if they were quartz hard drives designed to transmit wisdom to those who knew how to read them. Although these ideas seem more taken from science fiction than from archaeological research, they gain ground in popular culture. It is no coincidence that even Hollywood has used them as a central element in adventure and conspiracy films. The fascination with these pieces goes beyond their disputed origin. It has to do with what they represent. A skull is a universal symbol. It evokes death, yes, but also consciousness, identity, the soul. The fact that it is made of glass, pure, transparent, difficult to work with, gives it an almost sacred quality. It seems like a carved paradox. The solidity of the mineral contrasts with the fragility of human beings. Something that should be opaque and heavy is transformed into an object that seems to float, letting light pass through as if hiding a secret. Even if all the skulls were modern works, even if they were created in European workshops with 19th century tools, the impact they have had on the collective imagination is undeniable. There are objects that impose themselves more for what they awaken than for what they are. And this is one of those cases. Crystal skulls have been revered, feared, studied, rejected, and celebrated. They have circulated among powerful hands, been stolen, recovered, hidden. In many ways, they are like the great mysteries of the past, difficult to prove, impossible to forget. Perhaps it is not a question of confirming whether they are ancient or modern, authentic or fake. Perhaps the true value of crystal skulls lies in their ability to make us doubt, to force us to look more closely, to be wary of the obvious. They remind us that the past is not a straight line, but a field of shadows, where verifiable facts coexist with narratives that for some reason refuse to die. And as long as there are people who continue to wonder about them, as long as even one of these pieces continues to shine in the light, as if it contains something more than quartz, the enigma will live on, precisely carved, laden with silence, waiting. The Shutborough inscription in the gardens of Shockborough Hall, an English estate that looks like something out of a 17th century novel with its classical columns, moss-covered sculptures, an air of perpetual fog, stands a monument that has held a secret in stone for centuries. It is not a pyramid, nor a lost fortress, nor a 1,000-year-old object unearthed from a desert. It is a marble relief elegantly placed within a sculptural ensemble known as the Arcadian Shepherds. A seemingly simple work depicting a group of pastoral figures copied from Nicolas Poussin's painting. And yet, among the carvings, discreet but impossible to ignore, are 8 deliberately engraved letters. O-U-S, B, B-A-O below, 2 more letters D and M. Since this inscription was first noticed, the mystery has only grown. At first glance, it looks like a combination of initials or a random sequence, but its location, its persistence on the monument, and the fact that no one has been able to decipher its true meaning with certainty have made it one of the most perplexing codes in Europe. For decades, linguists, cryptographers, religious figures, academics, and amateurs have tried to make sense of it, always with the same mixture of frustration and fascination. The relief was carved in the mid-17th century and is attributed to Thomas Wright, an architect and astronomer, although others suggest that it was commissioned by George Anson, a renowned British admiral. The link with Anson is because he owned the estate and had a deep connection with symbols of occult knowledge, secret societies, and voyages fraught with exploration and mystery. In addition, Anson was one of the first Englishmen to circumnavigate the globe and return with treasures, stories, and a much broader worldview than his contemporaries. Many believe that the inscription is directly related to him, with some personal message encoded to withstand the test of time. Most intriguing of all is that the inscription has withstood the efforts of the best code breakers. Even British and American intelligence experts during World War II and in later years devoted time to trying to decipher the letters without success. Some believe they saw an acrostic, a sequence in which each letter represents a word. Others suggested that it is an encrypted key, a type of code that can only be solved if the original phrase or a hidden pattern is known. There are also those who believe that the letters are arranged as a visual puzzle, whose meaning only emerges when read from a specific angle or under certain lighting. For years, many theories accumulated like layers on the enigma. One of the most persistent suggests that the code is related to the Knights Templar and the Holy Grail. This hypothesis is supported by the choice of relief, a direct copy of Poussin's famous painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia, which features the enigmatic phrase "Et in Arcadia ego," an expression that has been interpreted as a veiled reference to death, eternity, and, for some, the concealment of sacred knowledge. That this scene was carved in Shockborough does not seem like an innocent coincidence. And when you add the inscription, many begin to see signs of a carefully hidden message, as if the monument were a kind of encrypted map. The Templar hypothesis gained strength after certain contemporary authors connected the code with Rennes-le-Château, the famous French village linked to legends about hidden treasures, secret lineages, and historical conspiracies. In this web of theories, Shockborough's inscription would be one more clue, a discrete trace of knowledge that has survived through symbols and codes scattered across different parts of the European continent. However, there are those who prefer a more down-to-earth approach. Some researchers have suggested that the inscription is simply a private message, perhaps an epitaph encrypted for personal reasons and intended for someone who already knew how to read it. From this perspective, the code would not be universal, mystical, or historical, but deeply intimate. It could be a phrase in Latin or even Old English, shortened to the point of being indecipherable without the right key. According to this line of thinking, the DM at the end of the inscription, common in Roman tombs as an abbreviation for dismanibus, dedicated to the spirits of the dead, would indicate that the entire message is a posthumous offering. The fascinating thing is that, while all these theories coexist, none has been confirmed. There is no original document explaining the purpose of the relief. There is no letter, no manuscript, no instruction revealing who devised the code or what they intended with it. The inscription is there, carved in stone, like an ancient voice speaking in a language that no one remembers. And that is its greatest power, because it is not what it says, we do not yet know, but what it provokes. The monument has become a magnet for all kinds of seekers, from casual tourists to esoteric enthusiasts to amateur cryptographers who spend years trying to decipher its letters. Every so often, someone claims to have found the solution, but all proposals so far have been rejected due to lack of evidence or overly far-fetched assumptions. And the enigma continues. Static cold, seemingly immobile, but alive in the minds of those who continue to wonder what that sequence of letters, carved more than 2 centuries ago, really meant. Perhaps the most valuable thing about Shukbarov's inscription is not its possible deciphering, but the fact that it has not yet been solved. Because in a world where everything seems to have an immediate explanation, where information is just a click away, there is something deeply human about a simple set of letters continuing to resist all interpretations. That small monument in an English garden reminds us that mystery is still part of life, that there are secrets that refuse to be revealed, and that not everything has to be understood to be meaningful. Perhaps one day someone will find the right key, the original phrase, the hidden meaning that connects each letter to its purpose. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the message will remain there intact, like an echo from the past that has survived all attempts to silence it. And perhaps in that silence lies its true strength, because there are codes that are not meant to be solved, but to be contemplated. And Shukbarov's inscription, even without revealing its secret, has already fulfilled its mission, to remind us that there are messages that can only be read with the imagination. The Rongo writing. In the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, on a piece of land isolated from the world by thousands of kilometers of water, one of the greatest linguistic enigmas on the planet unfolded. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as its original inhabitants call it, is famous for its moai. These stone statues gaze with an enigmatic expression toward the horizon, as if guarding a memory that no one else knows. But beyond these silent giants, the island hides an even deeper, more cryptic, more elusive mystery. A script that no one has been able to decipher completely, known as Rongo. This system of signs carved on wooden tablets represents one of the only known cases of writing in all of Polynesia. Its existence alone is an anomaly in the cultural development of the region, as no other oceanic society produced a formal writing system, either before or after. And yet, there were these tablets covered with a sequence of glyphs evoking human figures, geometric shapes, stylized animals, and repetitive symbols aligned in meticulous rows that were read alternately, following a pattern known as reverse boustrophedon, a form of zigzag reading where each line is oriented in the opposite direction to the previous one, and the figures must be rotated in order to follow the text. This technical detail is so unusual that even among the world's great writing systems, there are hardly any real parallels. The official discovery of Rongo occurred in the 19th century when European missionaries arrived on the island and reported on these tablets that the natives no longer knew how to read, but still kept as relics. Colonization, disease, slavery, and religious imposition had devastated the collective memory of a people who had lived in almost total isolation for centuries. The tablets, once possibly sacred objects, historical records, or ritual instruments, had become meaningless pieces to the last islanders who kept them. The knowledge to read them had been lost in the void of time, in a silence more tragic than any natural disaster. Over the years, researchers from around the world have attempted to unravel this system. There are just over 20 known authentic tablets scattered among museums and private collections. Some are burnt, incomplete, or eroded, further complicating their study. Everything has been tried. Comparative analyses, statistical studies of sign frequency, philological approaches, hypotheses about phonetic correspondences. But so far, no attempt has produced a verified translation or a functional interpretative framework. There is no Rosetta Stone for Rongo. All that exists are patterns, repetitions, and a suspicion that we are dealing with something deeply meaningful but misunderstood. One of the greatest difficulties lies in the total absence of linguistic context. Although the Rapanui language survives to this day and is part of the Polynesian family, there is no solid evidence that Rongo directly represents that language. Furthermore, the glyphs are highly stylized, making it difficult to know whether they represent sounds, complete words, ideas, or a combination of all of the above. Some scholars have proposed that the system is closer to a proto-writing, that is, a set of symbols that do not transcribe spoken language as an alphabet or syllabary would, but rather condense concepts or rituals through coded images. If this were true, then we would be looking at a type of ritual text, possibly recited by religious specialists or community leaders, whose content would depend as much on oral memory as on visual interpretation. On the other hand, there are those who argue that Rongo could indeed represent a structured written form of the Rapanui language, but that the available corpus is too small to reconstruct it. This theory gains strength from some glyphs that seem to repeat themselves in similar contexts, as if marking the beginning or end of sentences or indicating ritual terms, names of ancestors, or calendar dates. However, without further examples, without direct cultural context, without a living tradition to back it up, any attempt at translation remains conjecture. A little discussed but deeply disturbing aspect is the possibility that Rongo emerged as a late creation after European contact, imitating the idea of writing brought by the colonizers. This theory was put forward by some skeptical linguists who pointed to the lack of clear references to this writing in early chronicles. However, this hypothesis loses strength when one observes the structural complexity of the system and its graphic sophistication. Imitating a writing system is one thing. Developing a coherent internal logic with rules, symmetries, and a structured corpus is quite another. What makes Rongo so special is not only its mystery, but also its fragility. The fact that a complete writing system, perhaps comparable to Egyptian hieroglyphics or Chinese characters, has vanished almost without a trace, confronts us with an uncomfortable reality. That knowledge can disappear, that not everything ancient survives, that human history is full of gaps, of ideas that were not preserved, of languages that died in silence. Rongo encapsulates this loss. It is a writing system without readers, a message without a recipient, an echo that never reaches its destination. There are various theories about its function. Some suggest that the tablets were genealogical records of sacred lineages. Others believe that they represented hymns, ceremonial chants, astronomical codes, or even laws. There are also those who have suggested that the system was designed as a mnemonic device, that is, an aid to remembering long oral texts. If so, the signs would not tell the whole story on their own, but would serve as triggers for narratives that only lived as long as someone could pronounce them. If that is true, then the loss of the written language was not simply a failure to decipher it, but the death of an entire tradition. In recent years, technology has begun to offer new tools, three-dimensional scans, artificial intelligence applied to graphic patterns, and computational analysis of sign frequencies and combinations. All of this has made it possible to identify structural repetitions, correlations between tablets, and perhaps, just perhaps, a glimpse of visual grammar. However, without a direct connection to original speakers, the gap remains difficult to bridge. It is like looking at a map without knowing the language in which it was written. Perhaps the greatest value of Rongo Rongo lies precisely in its impossibility, because it forces us to recognize the limits of our understanding. It reminds us that not all mysteries are solved, and that there are languages that can only be understood by those who created them. Perhaps these tablets do not expect to be deciphered, but rather respected. Perhaps they are vestiges of a worldview that became extinct, not because of a lack of intelligence, but because of isolation, oblivion, tragedy. Today, the few surviving tablets are carefully protected in museums, silent fragments of a history that still breathes between the lines. Each one represents a part of that universe that we can no longer see in its entirety, but which we sense as we sense a forgotten dream upon waking. The Rongo Rongo, meanwhile, remains there in its corner of time, defying those who try to understand it. A reminder carved in wood that the past still holds secrets that will not surrender, and that silence is sometimes also a form of language. The tomb of Qushiwang. On the outskirts of Xi'an, in the heart of ancient imperial China, stands an artificial hill covered with earth, vegetation, and centuries of mystery. Beneath that silent mass of red earth and old roots lies, in theory, one of the world's greatest archaeological treasures, still intact. There, never having been opened, lies the mausoleum of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified the country, standardized writing, currency, and the width of card axles, and left behind not only a dynasty, but a dream of immortality made of stone, metal, and legend. Long before his death, Qin Shi Huang had already ordered the construction of his tomb. He did so with the same determination that characterized his reign, without reservation, without limits, without the slightest intention of measuring resources or lives. Thousands of workers, craftsmen, and slaves were assigned to build his eternal dwelling, an underground complex that, according to ancient records, was to be a replica of the world he ruled. An underground empire with mountains, rivers, stars painted on the ceiling, and an army that would accompany him forever. That funerary project was so ambitious that it took decades of work and continued even while he was still breathing, as if he knew that his death would be just another chapter in his reign. In 1974, when farmers were digging a well in search of water, they discovered what is now one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of all times: the terracotta army. Thousands of life-size figures, warriors, archers, officers, chariots, and horses, arranged in precise military order, each with unique features, carved with an individuality that borders on the obsessive. No two statues are identical. They're not just sculptures, they are portraits, and they were there to protect the emperor even after his last breath. But this already impressive army is more than just a prelude, because if anything distinguishes this story, it is not what has been found, but what remains hidden. The main mound where Qin Shi Huang lies has never been opened. The tomb itself, the heart of the complex, remains sealed. No one has entered, and not because of a lack of interest, but because the risk is so high and the mystery so dense that modern archaeology has decided to wait. Sometimes silence weighs more than curiosity. Ancient historical texts, especially those of Simon, a chronicler of the Han Dynasty, offer a description that is difficult to ignore. According to his writings, the interior of the tomb houses a miniature model of the empire with bronze mountains, luxurious palaces, and rivers made of liquid mercury that flow thanks to a mechanical system designed to simulate the natural course of water. The ceiling of the burial chamber was said to be covered with constellations painted with pearls and precious stones, as if Qin Shi Huang had wanted to transfer heaven and earth to his tomb, not out of nostalgia, but out of a desire for domination. In his underground world, it would remain the center of everything. The disturbing thing is that modern archaeology has partially confirmed these accounts. Studies conducted in the vicinity of the mound have detected abnormal concentrations of mercury in the soil, levels impossible to justify by natural causes. That means that at least on this point, the ancients did not exaggerate. The mercury is there. And if that is true, what else of what was said could be real? Does that imperial map exist underground? Are the deadly traps mentioned in the texts, automatic crossbows, motion-activated defense systems, still operational, waiting for anyone who dares to desecrate the place? The decision not to open the tomb until now has been primarily ethical. Experts have preferred to wait until technology allows it to be done without risk of destruction. Because if we have learned anything, it is that sometimes the mere act of opening can be a loss. Air, light, humidity, everything can damage what has remained sealed for more than 2,000 years. And this is not just any tomb. There is no polished marble or visible sarcophagi here. Here is a whole world designed to endure beyond life, outside of time, untouchable. Meanwhile, the mound remains there like a sleeping mountain. It has become almost a living presence, a kind of buried heartbeat that everyone feels but no one can quite hear. Visitors walk around the site with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. They come to see the terracotta army, the museum, the modern pavilions. But what they really came to see remains hidden. The tomb is there beneath their feet, guarding a secret so great that it seems to demand patience. A patience that has somehow already outlasted entire empires. The figure of Qin Shi Huang does not help to calm the imagination. He was a man who took ambition to its purest form. He wanted to conquer death, master knowledge, live forever. He drank elixirs of immortality made by alchemists who probably poisoned him without meaning to, and he sent expeditions to find the island of the eternal sages, expeditions that never returned. He believed that the world should be unified under a single law, a single language, a single vision. And although his methods were harsh and his reign short, he succeeded. In his own way, he won. He founded a country that still bears the name of his dynasty and designed his tomb as an extension of that power. To think that the body of that emperor sleeps underground, surrounded by the echoes of his conquests and the shadow of his immense ego, is to confront human desire in its most naked form. Not the desire to possess, but to remain, to resist oblivion, to be eternal. Qin Shi Huang's tomb is the result of a mind that did not accept the end, that wanted to control even the afterlife, and built a fortress of death as a testament to his will. Perhaps that is why it has not been opened, because to open it would be to confront not only the past, but a radical idea of power. It would be like opening a time capsule filled with ambition, symbolism, and warnings. And perhaps the world is not yet ready for that. Or perhaps, as some suspect, it is the tomb itself that is not ready to be revealed, as if it had its own calendar, as if it knew that one day someone would cross its threshold and then it would finally speak. Until that happens, the tomb remains one of the great silences of history. A dense, heavy, expectant silence, a mystery that beats beneath the Chinese earth, like a sleeping emperor who still dreams of his empire, while the world above turns without knowing quite what it holds. Because there are secrets that time respects, and this is undoubtedly one of them. The Lady of Day. In the heart of China, where history is deposited layer by layer under centuries of accumulated earth, there is a discovery that baffled even the most experienced archaeologists. Not because of its age, nor because of the gold or jewels. It was a body so well preserved that it looked as if it were asleep, as if death had stopped halfway, and life still clung to the Seikin, her soft face, her visible veins, the elasticity of her joints. Everything about her seemed to deny the passage of more than 2,000 years. Thus appeared the Lady of Day, and with her appearance was born one of the greatest mysteries in funerary history. The discovery took place in the early 1970s, when construction work in the city of Chang'an revealed a strange mound in the ground. Upon further investigation, archaeologists discovered a large tomb belonging to the Han Dynasty. 3 coffins, one inside the other, perfectly sealed, protected a lacquered sarcophagus decorated with exquisite detail. Inside, wrapped in dozens of layers of silk, was the body of Qinshui, Marquise of Dai, wife of a noble official of the empire. A name forgotten in the books, but today remembered as the best-preserved corpse in ancient history. What surprised the excavation team was not only the excellent condition of the coffin, nor the offerings, nor the everyday objects that accompanied the burial. It was her, the woman. Her skin was intact, slightly damp to the touch. The body retained subcutaneous fat. Her internal organs were in place with no signs of decomposition. Even her blood type could be determined. It was as if she had been buried a few weeks earlier and not more than 2 millennia ago. The phenomenon of natural body preservation is not new. There are Egyptian mummies, bodies frozen in ice, human remains, trapped in acid bogs that have preserved hair and soft tissue. But nothing like this. The Lady of Da was not mummified with resins or dry linen wrappings. Her body remained flexible, intact, without having been embalmed in the way we know it. No other comparable find, whether in Egypt, America, or Asia, has shown such a perfect level of preservation. How is this possible? That is the question that still remains. Details discovered inside the tomb offer some clues. The triple coffin was hermetically sealed, preventing the entry of air and external bacteria. A mysterious reddish liquid was found around the body, the exact composition of which is still the subject of debate. It has been suggested that it may have had bactericidal properties or that it served to regulate the temperature inside the coffin. In addition, the layers of silk, oils, and as yet unidentified ingredients present in the body's wrapping may have formed an unprecedented chemical barrier. But even with all these measures, the preservation is astonishing. This is not a miracle of nature, but the result of technical knowledge that has not yet been replicated with precision. It is a lost formula developed in an era that we now tend to consider rudimentary. And that is the most fascinating thing. That more than 2,000 years ago, in a China still far removed from the modern world, someone knew how to protect a body from the passage of time with an efficiency that amazes even today's scientists. What we know about Shinshui has been reconstructed from medical analyses and objects found in his tomb. He was overweight, had high cholesterol, gallstones, and signs of heart disease. He had also suffered from stomach ulcers. Despite his privileged social position, he was not in good health. He was overweight, had cholesterol problems, gallstones, and signs of heart disease. He had also suffered from stomach ulcers. Despite his privileged social position, his health was fragile, and yet the care taken in preparing his tomb reveals a level of respect and veneration that was probably reserved only for very important figures within the hierarchy of the time. The banquets, musical instruments, cosmetics, fans, clothing, and even medical utensils found around her form a kind of intimate museum about her life. Each object tells a part of her story. The lacquered vessels, still shiny, speak to us of a refined aesthetic. The medical texts, kitchen utensils, and handwritten formulas show that she was not simply a noble woman, but someone who lived in an environment where knowledge was valued and the art of living extended to the way of dying. The tomb itself is a work of emotional engineering, an attempt to halt death through beauty, control, and knowledge. Over time, the figure of the Lady of Day has transcended archaeology. She has become a symbol of what we still do not know about the past. While modern technologies continue to try to understand how she was preserved, her body continues to defy logic, resting in a museum where temperature, light, and humidity are controlled down to the millimeter to prevent that perfect balance from being broken. It is perhaps ironic that the present has to work so hard to preserve what the past achieved with such precision. It is not surprising that for many, this woman seems closer than figures who lived just a century ago. There is something deeply human about her, in her serene face, in the history of her health, in the everyday objects she left behind. Shinshui, the Lady of Dai, was not a mythical figure, nor a forgotten empress, nor a warrior. She was someone who loved, who suffered, who ate well, who fell ill and died, and who, through a series of carefully made decisions, was preserved until she achieved a form of immortality that even she could not have imagined. The greatest mystery is perhaps not how her body was preserved, but why. What was the point of preserving in such detail something that was, by definition, destined to disappear? Perhaps it was not an attempt at eternity, but a gesture of love, loyalty, and deep belief that the body must be kept intact to cross over to the other side. Or perhaps it was an expression of power, of absolute control over destiny. Whatever the reason, it worked. Today, the Lady of De Crystal. Visitors gaze at her in awe, with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. It is easy to forget that it is a real body, a person who once lived, but it only takes a few seconds of looking at her to feel that she is there, not as a corpse, but as a witness, a living fragment of the past looking at us from the silence, saying nothing, but expressing more than any written text. And as long as she remains intact, as long as the mystery of her preservation is not fully solved, she will continue to be just that. A door between two times, a story that refuses to disappear, a body that did not want to leave. The mummies of Darim. In the far west of China, beyond the mountains, the desert, and what were once the most important trade routes of the ancient world, lies the Taklamakan Desert, a vast expanse of dry sand and piercing winds that seems designed to erase all traces of life. And yet it was there, in the midst of this unforgiving landscape, that one of the most unexpected discoveries in modern archaeology was made. It was not temples, palaces, or gold artifacts. It was bodies, extraordinarily well-preserved bodies, buried for millennia under the sand, with blonde hair, high cheekbones, and features that, surprisingly, did not fit in the least with the image one would expect to find in the ancient history of Central Asia. These figures, known today as the Darim desert mummies, not only challenged the expectations of the archaeologists who discovered them, but also shook deeply rooted ideas about migration, cultural contact, and the diversity of the most ancient civilizations, because these mummies were not the result of embalming rituals or sophisticated funeral techniques. Their almost intact condition was due to the dry climate, the salinity of the soil, and the way they were buried in sealed coffins and woven baskets, protected from air and water. No complicated ceremonies, just sand, wind, and time. But what really caught the world's attention was their appearance. The Darim mummies, some of them more than 4,000 years old, have distinctly European features. They are tall, with long noses, deep-set eyes, reddish hair, and fair skin. They were dressed in intricately woven woolen garments, leather boots, conical hats, and sometimes necklaces made of finistons. The remarkably well-preserved fabrics showed geometric patterns more reminiscent of Western than Eastern textile traditions. It was as if someone had uprooted a people from Northern Europe and placed them there in the heart of Asia, centuries before official history considered it possible. One of the best-known figures is the so-called Beauty of Lulon, a woman with a delicate face, visible eyelashes, long braided hair, and a serene air that seems to resist oblivion. Her tomb was found near Lake Lopner, on one of the edges of the desert, along with everyday tools, food remains, and the ancient dust that seemed to protect her rest with an almost sacred delicacy. Not far from there, the Sherchin man, another of the most famous bodies, also appeared. He was almost 2 m tall, had a thick beard, and wore carefully sewn red clothes. He looked more like a Celtic warrior than an inhabitant of the ancient Chinese regions. The discovery of these mummies sparked a wave of questions. Who were these people? Where did they come from? What were they doing in a territory so far from their supposed roots? Genetic studies carried out in recent decades confirmed that these individuals were mainly of European descent, linked to Indo-European groups that, it was believed, had not yet reached so far east at that time. Some analyses identified genetic markers present in peoples of the Eurasian steppes, such as the Tocharians, a culture that is suspected to have flourished in the region before being absorbed, transformed, or simply wiped out by successive waves of migration and conquest. This discovery reconfigured theories about the Silk Road and the role this region had played as a meeting point between East and West long before the Classical era. The presence of Indo-European peoples in Central Asia meant not only trade, but also lasting settlements, languages, customs, and social structures that left their mark, albeit one that went unnoticed for a long time. The Dari mummies were more than a biological phenomenon. They were proof of a buried history, one that spoke of large-scale human movements, adaptations to extreme environments, and cultural encounters that are still difficult to fully interpret today. As excavations continued, archaeologists found hundreds of graves, some individual, others collective. They contained men, women, and children. In many cases, the bodies were wrapped with the same care, their hands crossed over their chests, and their eyes closed as if they were sleeping. The cemeteries were strategically located near oases or watercourses, and their orientation suggested astronomical knowledge, or at least symbolic rituals related to the sun and the seasons. Writings in dead languages were also found, vestiges of a civilization that had its own system of communication, now virtually lost. And although these findings have been studied, documented, and published, for years they were also uncomfortable. For some official sectors in China, the story of the Dari mummies intersected with sensitive political issues, especially in a region marked by ethnic and cultural tensions. The idea of an ancient population with Western features, living and thriving in what is now Chinese territory, has been a sensitive issue. For this reason, access to the mummies was limited for a long time. Studies were conducted in silence, and the dissemination of results was handled with extreme caution. But over time, the facts prevailed. Science continued to advance, and the remains continued to speak, not with words, but with DNA fibers, with the logic of tissues, with the silent information of bone. The Dari mummies not only changed what we knew about the ancient history of Asia, they also raised a bigger, deeper question. How many stories have been lost beneath the sand? How many forgotten peoples have existed, leaving no testimony other than a handful of graves and eyes closed for eternity? Today, some of the most iconic mummies are on display in museums, while others remain under investigation. They are fragile, silent bodies, but they are full of memories. In a way, they walk alongside us. They are the faces of a humanity that does not always fit the lines on maps, that is not confined by fixed borders, that moves, that mixes, that leaves traces where least expected. The Dari mummies, wrapped in wool and time, watch us from the past. They're not looking for answers. They're the questions themselves, questions made of flesh, braided hair, and sleepy eyes. And as long as they remain there, intact under glass or covered in dust in the earth that protects them, they will continue to repeat without a voice, but with unwavering eloquence that history is not just one story, that history sometimes has a face, and that face may be that of someone who lived in the most remote place in the world and who, against all odds, was never completely forgotten. By Manas in ancient India, there are certain stories that do not die, that seem to be waiting patiently on the margins of time for someone to look at them again with open eyes. They need no proof, no excavations, no visible structures. They are sustained by words, by the echoes of ancient texts, by stories passed down through generations that, by dint of repetition, end up acquiring a weight that defies reason. In India's vast literary tradition, one such story revolves around enigmatic flying machines mentioned in sacred texts, the Baimanas. For many, the word sounds almost like a mythological whisper, something between fantasy and metaphor. But within the pages of the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and other Vedic texts, the Baimanas do not appear as symbols, but as vehicles defined with specific details, structures that could rise into the air, travel at great speeds, and in some passages even change direction without losing altitude. They were not clouds, they were not celestial chariots pulled by magical horses, they were constructions, machines. And the most disconcerting thing is how they were described. There is talk of Baimanas that were circular, square, lotus-shaped or double-disc-shaped, with internal compartments, propulsion systems, and in certain translations, direct references to complex metals, mercury as fuel, and mechanisms that sound strangely modern for literature that is more than 2 millennia old. The Samarangan Sutradhara, a treatise on architecture attributed to King Boja, devotes several passages to these ships, explaining how they were designed, how they balanced in the air, and what kind of energy propelled them. Admittedly, the text is more speculative than technical, and many of the descriptions can be interpreted in different ways. But the fact is that the details are there, and so is the insistence. For a long time, scholars considered references to the Vaimanas to be simply part of the symbolic apparatus of the Vedic epics. Like the multi-armed gods or lightning-throwing weapons, literary figures, poetic devices, and mythological hyperbole. But as certain descriptions began to be carefully reviewed by more daring researchers, the idea arose that perhaps, just perhaps, these passages were not pure metaphor, that they could be echoes of a lost technology, of a previous knowledge that remained in the collective memory in a distorted form until it became part of myth. Proponents of this possibility often point enthusiastically to a little-known text called the Vaimanika Shastra, a work written in the early 20th century by Subbaraya Shastri, who claimed to have received it in a trance-like state as if channeling ancient knowledge. The text describes various types of Vaimanas, their structures, the materials needed to build them, and how they operate. It even mentions air wars, weaponry, and defensive systems, although it has been harshly criticized by the scientific community, mainly because there is no archaeological evidence to support its claims and because many of its terms do not match ancient technical vocabulary. The intensity of the account has brought the subject back into circulation. But beyond the modern controversy, what is really intriguing is that Vaimanas appear in texts that predate any known form of human flight. In the Ramayana, Prince Rama returns to his kingdom in an aerial vehicle called Pushpakika Vimana, described as a flying palace capable of moving at will. The Mahabharata recounts battles that include aerial maneuvers, destructive rays, and storms generated by machines. We're not talking about a few isolated verses, but entire passages where the sky is the scene of conflict and technological advancement. So what are we to make of this information? For many historians, the most sensible approach is to understand the Vaimanas as symbols of power, metaphors for control of the sky, the connection between gods and men, or even representations of higher states of consciousness. But others allow themselves a different reading. They suggest that while the texts may have been embellished over time, they could contain traces of very ancient truths, as if these stories preserve in their deepest core the fragmented memory of a civilization that developed scientific and technical knowledge, of which no physical trace remains, but which survive through the spoken word. What is fascinating is how this type of idea manages to make both traditional and scientific thinking so uncomfortable, because it forces us to look at the scriptures with different eyes, to take them not only as literature, but as possible cultural archives of collective experiences. And if we accept that, then we must recognize that the legacy of ancient civilizations could be full of clues that we simply have not been able to read. In recent years, interest in the Vaimanas has moved beyond the alternative academic sphere and into popular culture. Documentaries, books, conferences, and even novels have taken up the subject with enthusiasm. The image of the flying palace, the gravity-defying machine, the forgotten knowledge, seems to have a special resonance in our age, obsessed with the limits of technology and the possibility that there may have been a past different from the one we were taught. Of course, there is a lack of material evidence. No remains of Vaimanas have been found, nor any authentic plans or ancient artifacts that can be directly associated with a flying machine. And perhaps that is why the story has not yet entered the realm of the accepted. But that doesn't mean it's not worth exploring further, because beyond whether or not the Vaimanas flew, what is clear is that ancient peoples imagined flight with astonishing precision. They thought about it, described it, and wrote about it, not as a distant fantasy, but as part of their world. There's something deeply powerful about that. The fact that thousands of years before a human being took off in an airplane, there were already stories that spoke of the air as a path, of the sky as a conquerable territory. Those visions, real or not, are a sign of how human thought has always been willing to push its own limits, to imagine what it could not yet build, to dream with its feet on the ground and its gaze on the impossible. Today, Vimanas remain a mystery. They have no wings in a museum, no engines in display cases, no charred remains in ruins, but they continue to fly in some way over the pages of ancient texts, between the lines of those who refuse to believe that everything has already been said, because there are stories that do not need to land to have weight. And the Vimanas, with all they represent, continue to travel through the skies of India. But in the imagination of those who still believe that the past has many more layers than we are willing to accept. Ancient nuclear sites in Mohenjo-Daro. In the arid landscape of present-day Pakistan, where the sun falls like molten lead on the silent ruins, stand the remains of one of the most mysterious cities of antiquity. Mohenjo-Daro, founded more than 4,000 years ago on the banks of the Indus River, was one of the most advanced urban centers of its time. A carefully planned city with drainage systems that surpassed those of many later civilizations and structures that spoke of a sophisticated, organized, meticulous society. But it is another, much darker and more puzzling aspect that has caused this lost city to arouse suspicion, questions, and even theories that push the boundaries of what is accepted. Something happened there, something that is still not fully understood. In the mid-20th century, when archaeologists began to dig deeper in Mohenjo-Daro, they noticed a number of details that did not quite fit the usual profile of a city abandoned due to wear and tear, disease, or economic collapse. Some skeletons were found in strange positions, as if they had died suddenly, with no signs of struggle or visible wounds. Others, even more disturbingly, appear to have been subjected to such intense heat that they were partially vitrified, as if they had been exposed to temperatures not easily achieved even with fire. The stones of certain walls showed signs of melting, as if they had been melted, and in some areas the natural radiation from the ground was significantly higher than in surrounding areas. The information was fragmentary at first, but enough to fuel speculation. Could a nuclear explosion have occurred in ancient times? Was it possible that such a remote civilization had access to such advanced destructive knowledge? The mere possibility was dizzying, and thus one of the most persistent theories in the world of archaeological mysteries was born. Mohenjo-Daro was the scene of an atomic catastrophe in the distant past, perhaps in the context of a war lost to history, involving a technology that later vanished completely. Although the scientific community has tried many times to discredit this idea, the strange details remain. The vitrification of materials is not common. It requires temperatures of thousands of degrees. The presence of skeletons without significant decomposition for centuries is also not normal, much less in climates where the elements should have erased them long ago. The distribution of the bodies, some found face down, holding hands, far from their homes, as if trying to flee from something invisible, has given rise to more interpretations than certainties. Added to this are the ancient texts. The Vedas, the great scriptures of India, contain descriptions that some researchers have linked to nuclear-type explosions. In particular, the Mahabharata speaks of divine weapons capable of producing a glowing column of smoke and flames as bright as 1,000 suns, with scorching winds, effects on the skin and hair loss, and total devastation that leaves no trace of life. Comparisons with a modern atomic detonation were quick to follow. And although these texts are mythological, the accuracy of certain passages is disturbing. It is not just a matter of destruction, but a detailed description of the physical effect that such a weapon would have on living beings and the environment. The idea of a civilization with nuclear capabilities in ancient times seems like something out of science fiction. But if one moves away from the literal concept of a bomb and focuses on the idea of advanced technology lost in time, the question takes on a different tone. It is possible that more complex knowledge existed than traditional history recognizes, and that events such as Mohenjo-Daro are the scars of that knowledge. This is not a conclusion, but it is a scenario that some dare to consider, especially when the archaeological remains continue to leave more questions than answers. Of course, there are more conventional explanations. Some geologists have suggested that the vitrification could have been caused by high-intensity lightning or extreme fires fueled by specific combustible materials. Others point out that the radiation levels may have a natural origin due to the concentration of certain minerals in the subsoil. There are also those who claim that the arrangement of the bodies is not as unusual as has been said, and that it is a misinterpretation of the excavation data. All of that is possible. But what remains unchanged is the fact that Mohenjo-daro was abruptly abandoned, that no signs of conventional warfare were found, and that what happened there remains in many ways an unsolved mystery. Beyond the theories, Mohenjo-daro is a warning written in ancient bricks. It was a brilliant city with straight streets, two-story houses, water channels, and sewer systems that still amaze us today with their efficiency. It was a society with rules, well-defined structures, and remarkable advances for its time. And yet it disappeared. Not slowly, as empires usually fall, but suddenly, as if something irreversible had made it impossible to continue. There are those who think that talking about ancient nuclear technology is an exaggeration, a desire to find the incredible where it would suffice to accept the improbable. And that may be true, but it is also true that history is full of gaps, absences, moments that we do not fully understand. Mohenjo-daro could be one of them. An echo of something that happened before we began to write everything down, before we had a collective memory. An event erased, transformed into myth, reduced to ruins. Today, walking through the silent streets of Mohenjo-daro produces a strange sensation. There is order but no life. There is structure but no continuity. Everything is there but empty. The walls, the wells, the steps. Every stone seems to know something it is not saying, and it is difficult not to imagine, standing under that unchanging sun, what really happened in this lost city. Because there are places that seem to carry in their cracks a truth that does not want to be revealed. And Mohenjo-daro is undoubtedly one of those places. A fixed point on the map of mystery, an ancient wound on the skin of the world that, despite the passage of time, has not yet completely healed. If any of these mysteries made you think, I want to know, which one impacted you the most? Which one do you think is real? Is it fiction or something we're not ready to understand yet? Leave your theory in the comments, and the best answers may appear in future videos. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring the secrets that history doesn't tell us. And remember, the unknown is always closer than it seems. See you in the next enigma. M.